Hi. In this second last lecture, I'm going to describe peak experiences. If you have put into practice each of the characteristics described in the earlier lectures, over time these will combine in a subtle chemistry to create spontaneously peak experiences, what Abraham Maslow, called peak experiences. They can be compared to becoming enlightened or experiencing Satori. The way that Maslow described this matches very closely the experience of people in other earlier traditions talking about becoming enlightened or experiencing Satori or becoming awake, waking up. If you look at what enlightenment and awakening is in those earlier traditions, it seems to come down to coming to feel that you are connected in a feeling sense. You have a sense of felt connectedness with everything there is in the universe, essentially. There's no separation between you and everything out there. Most people walking around in the world see themselves as an individual, as a separate entity in the world of forms around them. They are separate. And that creates a sense of separation from the world outside. Enlightenment, or peak experiences, is when that sense of separation dissolves and you come to feel that you are connected with everything. And that is qualitatively what the peak experience really is. So Maslow described this, and I quote from Maslow: "Feelings of limitless horizons opening up to the vision, the feeling of being simultaneously more powerful and more helpless than one has ever felt before. It's the feeling of ecstasy and wonder and awe, the loss of placement in time and space, with finally the conviction that something extremely important and valuable has happened, so that the subject, that's you, was to some extent transformed and strengthened, even in their daily life, by this experience. When peak experiences are especially powerful, the sense of self dissolves into an awareness of a greater unity." This is what Maslow described it, and it, as I say, matches very closely with these earlier ideas of enlightenment, Satori, and so on. Peak experiences are the transcending of ordinary consciousness, as I say, in which you see yourself as a separate entity from the world. It's a state of mind in which you see yourself and everything as fully interconnected, and a feeling of being one with all things. While you can't order this up on demand, as I have been saying throughout, you can create the right conditions for them to occur spontaneously in your life. Here's an example from my own life of a peak experience, and I simply offer it up as an illustration of how these things can occur. They can come from the most ordinary day-to-day experiences and lead to something wonderful. So some time ago, and as I talked about in an earlier lecture about gratitude, I decided that I would cultivate a sense of attitude, what I at the time called an attitude of gratitude. So I developed an attitude of appreciating the many small things around me as I went about my daily life. I noticed that there were large and small things, and that some of these small things were really interesting, but very easy to overlook them. And to most people, these small things do seem so ordinary and commonplace that they're very easy to overlook. So I decided that they would be a good thing to appreciate and develop a sense of gratitude for. They're worth it. You know, in their way, they are perfect little things, and they have much to tell us if we stop and notice with an open mind, like a child would. Keep an open mind at looking at things. They don't impose judgment, they simply look and observe and appreciate. So with this mindset, one day I arrived at work and I parked my car in the multi-level car park of the university where I work. Now this university is set in the middle of a eucalypt forest, and there's a 10-minute walk from the car park to my office. So as I walked along the path, I noticed that there was moss growing in the cracks between the paving stones as I walked along. Just ordinary moss. It's a common sight in shady places wherever you go, where the dew lingers, even in dry eucalypt forests like this one. And it's easy to take for granted and to overlook it because, you know, we're often preoccupied and it's so small and it's so common. It's just one of 1,000 objects passing through our visual field at during any day. So I chose one instance of this humble little plant. I just chose it at random, and I got down and looked at it more closely. It looked so interesting that the next day I revisited that same bit of plant with a camera, and I took a photo of it, which I'll put up in a moment. And with the macro lens on my camera, I took a photo, as you can see. There's something quite beautiful about moss when you see it up close. It's perfect. It's a perfectly adapted survivor for something like 500 million years. This little plant has existed on our planet. That's a tremendously long time, much, much longer than the human species has existed. So there I am, down on my hands and knees, looking at it and feeling very humble in the presence of this survivor, this perfectly adapted survivor. It was mind-expanding to think how this humble little plant had existed in its current form for so long. I tried to stretch my imagination across that vast span of time, 500 million years. That's quite a thing to try and do in itself. And then I thought, well, don't stop there. Having stretched my imagination so far into the past, now I tried sending it into the future by the same amount. Now I had a billion year span, which was balanced on the fulcrum of the now moment, right here, right now. And this modest little plant turned out to have a very big story to tell me, or to anyone who was prepared to listen to it. And the story that it told me in that moment was that my appreciation of this little plant was, in a sense, the dream of the earth realized. The earth wanted me to look at it and appreciate it and think these thoughts. In a broad sense, life on this planet is an integrated whole, and that life wants to become conscious of itself. It wants to become more conscious of itself, and I was contributing to the rising consciousness of all life on the planets just in a small way by thinking that train of thought. So after 4 billion years of evolution on this planet, life had become somewhat aware of itself. Humans are one form of life on this planet that is aware of itself. And this is a major milestone, and I felt greatly privileged to be part of it. I knew, though, that the moss would have told the same story to anybody else who was willing to listen to it. But unlike the moss, we humans, well, we won't survive 1 billion years in our current form. That much is certain. And when our species has morphed into something else, or perhaps even become extinct, the moss will almost certainly still be growing, modestly growing in its shady, damp places. Then I realized that this train of thought was a continuation of one that I had begun 35 years earlier. In the 1970s, I had visited an ancient forest in New Zealand. It was near the southland town of Te Anau. The glaciated terrain of this area is like that of the Cadillac National Park in the state of Maine in the US, or the fjords of Norway, for example. That'll give you an idea of what it's like. And the forest here has been as it has been since the last ice age, perhaps 10,000 plus years ago. Though this kind of forest had probably grown here on and off for many millions of years during the interglacial periods. The trees here were magnificent. They were tall and straight and majestic in their ancientness. There was a quality too. The quality of light that filtered through the forest canopy gave this place a glowing, transcendent beauty. Very, very beautiful, and as the photo will show, it was like being on the set of the movie Lord of the Rings. So the moss in this temperate forest covered every bit of available ground, and the layer of this moss was perhaps a metre thick in some places, and it was soft underfoot. It was like walking on a mattress. It exhaled a sweet, earthy breath when I walked on it. I felt I felt this immense reverence for that moss in that moment. I still remember it now as I make this video. I wanted to sink into it, to be embraced by it, to become one with it. So in that peak experience moment, as I lay on the moss, something in me resonated with the spirit of that forest. It was a moment of enlightenment, of self-actualization. Peak experiences like this have a way of staying with you forever, of changing you for the better forever. It's a constant source of happiness. And you can have that happiness too if you work to emulate the characteristics that have been explained in this course. In the final lecture, I'll just go over I'll recap and go over the characteristics that I've talked about in the previous 12 lectures. So join me for the last lecture, the conclusion.